What
I got
took you so long?
8:31. Are you ready? Everybody ready? I call this budget retreat, the Williamsburg-James City County School Board to order. Ms. Surza, could you take the roll?
Dr. Beers,
Here.
Ms. Cook,
Here.
Ms. Hummel,
Here.
Mrs. Taylor. Here. Mrs. Young,
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here. Just for everybody's understanding, this is being live streamed on the web, on our WJCC website, so you can call your friends and relatives and have them watching it there. Since we are here to talk about the budget, I just want to make the General Assembly a couple of years ago changed some laws. So as a member of the School Board of Williamsburg-James City County, I acknowledge that I have an interest in the fiscal year 2016-27 school budget because my wife is an employee of the WJCC schools. However, I believe that I am able to participate in the consideration of and vote on the budget fairly. And then,
Yes, I too would like to make a statement. As a member of the School Board of Williamsburg-James City County, I acknowledge that I have an interest in the FY 2016-2017 school budget because I'm an employee of the Williamsburg Health Foundation. However, I believe that I'm able to participate in the consideration of and vote on the budget fairly and in the interest of the citizens.
thank you. That's administrative work out of the way. The purpose of the retreat here today is to set the school board's budget priorities. We're in the phase of the budget cycle now where the superintendent is developing his budget. We do not want him to do that in a vacuum. We're not going to talk about what funding we have, what funding we don't have too much. This is more to give guidance to the superintendent and the administration on how they develop the budget, what their priorities are as they move into that phase of it. In a few minutes, Ms. Berta will review important statutes governing the development of the budget, why we're here, responsibilities of the board and the superintendent, the process, needs and requirements, and our revenues. The administration will take our priorities and comments and build them into the superintendent's proposed budget. We have a budget calendar out there. We are going to try to accelerate it and have the superintendent present his budget the first meeting in February versus the second, which is what our calendar says, allowing us more time to review, discuss, and ultimately adopt a budget. As General Assembly, the statutes say that we have to adopt it no later than April 1st to send it to our funding partners for their consideration and review. I think that's about it. Dr. Constantino, have I covered everything for you?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the board, good morning. Happy Saturday. Want to just echo a couple of things that Mr. Kelly said and hopefully just get right to it. Our purpose today is really exactly what Mr. Kelly said, and that is to share with you what we have collected from the workforce in terms of priorities and needs of the division as it is based on the strategic plan. We have tied all of the things that you'll see here in a few minutes will be tied directly to the strategic plan, will be tied directly to the goals and objectives of the school division. Ms. Berta will share with you the process that we go through that starts, well, in some cases never ends really, but starts really gearing up in November with cost center managers in schools and requests. The administration takes a look at it. And then what's really important, what I think has helped our budget process go a bit smoother, is to make sure that we're very clear on school board priorities. Of all the things you see today, it's going to be very clear to us, it's already very clear to us that we can't have it all. So what are the priorities? And I think it's important for the board to weigh in on this early so that we can develop a budget that is reflective of your concerns, your desires, your vision, and the kinds of things that you think are important as well. And we're going to really engage you in that process. This isn't going to be a discussion. I'll warn you now, for those people who don't like to get up and move, you're going to have to get up and move. We're going to ask you to physically give us some priorities, and we're going to take you through that exercise. We've done this before. Works out pretty well. It allows you to talk to each other, to discuss, take all the time you want to figure things out, ask questions. And it gives us some very clear information on what you perceive to be the priorities of the priorities. And then lastly today, we will take a first swipe at the governor's budget. And I think I'll say now, and you'll probably hear Ms. Berta say at least one more time, if not two more times, Rarely, if ever, does the General Assembly adopt the governor's budget. So we never know what's going to happen. The Assembly is just gearing up now for the session, so we'll see what happens. But we'll tell you what we know today, with the caveat that could very well change over the course of the early winter and spring. So with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Berta to take us through a little bit of our processes and get us to the point of where we can start with the priorities. I will say to you that we are going to do something a little bit different this year than we've done in the past, in as much as we've categorized the priorities. We have done it in the past where we have put everything in one big pot, and it becomes very difficult, I think, to prioritize all these things. So we have created a category of employee compensation, because there are a number of things to deal with in compensation. We have created a category of staffing issues, and then another category of operational issues. And we're going to ask you to not only prioritize, but prioritize within those categories, because you'll see in a few minutes there are some important things, important decisions, important discussions that we'll have to have along the way. So with that, I will ask Ms. Berta, who officially begins her high season this morning, with this meeting.
Thank you.
She probably thinks that started a while.
I'm sure she
Yeah, it never ends. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I just want to preface, if I move too quickly through anything, please do not hesitate to stop me and ask questions. This is very familiar to me, and I know it's not very familiar to you, so I want to make sure that I provide you the most information that you need to make the best decision for the school division. So just very quickly, I'll review some of the state requirements, as Mr. Kelly mentioned. We will go over a little bit about what the budget development process is. Then we will start our prioritization, first looking at salary adjustment recommendations, and then staffing, then non-personnel decisions that we need to make as a division. Then we'll take a look at the local composite index, what that change did and how it affected us. And then a first look at what the governor's proposed budget is and the impact on revenues at this point. So the first state code section that I'd like to draw your attention to, and this is what we build our budget based on, is the responsibility of the division superintendent and the school board to evaluate the funds that are deemed necessary in the next fiscal year to provide the best education possible for the division students. So we need to keep those things in mind as we move forward, because it is our responsibility to determine what is needed in order to make our students successful. The second code section is with regard to the time of what we have to provide to our governing body. By April 1st, by this code section, we are required to submit our budget of need to the local governing body. They then, in turn, have until May 15th to determine how much of that funding they will provide to us and get that budget back to you. However, if the state does not complete their General Assembly session, they have up to 30 days after the completion of the General Assembly session. So that is a caveat that's there, and most of the time the governing body tries to give you a preliminary budget by the May 15th deadline, because we have the caveat of having to issue employee contracts so that teachers know that they have a job for the next year. So our budget development goals are to develop a budget that aligns with the strategic plan, and then develop a budget that meets the identified needs of the division. So beginning in September, we send out information to our cost center managers, which includes our building principals, department heads, and ask them to evaluate their current budget and what they think they will need going forward, based on things that they know, changes in state code, state changes in requirements. They need to incorporate those things, and we do ask them to ask for a budget of need, because this is their opportunity to say, if they don't have something, this is what we need and this is why. So we've been through that process. In November and December, those items are evaluated by the superintendent's cabinet, and we take a look at it and say what is really needed. It doesn't mean that it's not needed, but we prioritize those needs on what we take and bring to you. So then we're at January, and then we get your input on those things that we think are necessary to provide adequate support for next year's budget to you today. So, yep, Mr. Chairman.
Good.
Ms. Berta, I know that we've been under budget constraints for many years. I'm curious this year in that process, was there a pretty big gap between the information and requests that came to you and to the cabinet, and in between? I'm kind of curious if it felt a little bit like more this year because we've been holding so tight for so many years.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about some of that gap when we get to our staffing positions, because that's where we did see the biggest gap. You know, several years ago, when money was tight, positions were eliminated in the division, and more hats were having to be worn by smaller numbers of people. So they're feeling crunches because people are being asked to do more with less. So we'll talk a little bit about that gap as we go through.
Sorry to get ahead.
That's okay, that's
And-
okay.
And the enrollment continues to grow.
Absolutely. So the first set of items that we want to take a look at are with regard to salary compensation. These are three options that are proposed. It doesn't mean that we have to do any of them. But the first area is, just so you know, in order to provide all employees a step increase, and teachers a step increase, and all other employees a 2.5% salary increase, because the salary scale equates to an average of a 2.5% salary increase. So to make it equitable for all employees, the proposed cost of that would be $2.1 million to make that happen. If you wanted to provide a 1% salary increase to all staff, the cost of that 1% is $841,000. The last step, or the last item, is with regard to compression. For many years, we were not able to do salary increases in the division, which means that a teacher scale becomes compacted, so you would have multiple years of experience on the same salary step. So people aren't moving through the scale when you have funding available to do so. So we've taken a look at some options, and the option that's being proposed by our HR department is to make a step equivalent to a year of service. So we're trying to get everybody back where their years of service will equate to a step. In order to accomplish that, it would cost a little over $1 million. So that would move people through steps, but it would make a step for a year of service. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, just to make sure that the way our salary structure for our teachers works is we have 1 through 7, thank you. 1 through 27, and for years, we were hiring teachers, but not moving them on step because of budget issues. So we have 4 or 5 years of teachers on step 1. Maybe we took a step last year, so maybe on step 2 now this year. So you have teachers with 2 years experience on step 2, and you have teachers with 7 years experience on step 2, when they should actually be at step 7, theoretically.
Right.
So the issue with that is some people will get money and others will not, right?
Correct.
So just to help decompress some of that issue.
Correct.
So,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the budget priorities here for salary adjustment. It says step increase to impact most employees.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
In the current teacher salary scale, once you reach the top of the scale, there's nowhere for you to move. We don't expand the scale. So employees that are maxed out on the scale, that's the end of their opportunity to receive an increase. I will put the caveat out there that we can change any of that to provide them a flat amount if we wanted to do that. There's options available in order to change what the practice has been in the division. But the practice has been, once you meet the top of the scale, you're not eligible for any additional salary increases.
yeah, once you're at step 27 of the, we have the various scales. So you have one with it's a bachelor's degree, one with a master's degree, one with a PhD degree. So once you reach the top of your scale at step 27, you don't get an increase unless the whole scale is adjusted. So there have been times where you go from step 26 to 27, so you get that step increase. But as well, we've done a cost of living adjustment to the entire thing to raise the whole thing up 2%, 3%, 1%, some number. So when they talk about a step increase, those teachers at the top of their step, whether it be the bachelor's or the master's or the PhD, will not get an increase, but everybody else does.
Okay.
Sure.
I just want to comment, I'm opposed to people at the top of the scale not getting an increase. It affects their Social Security and other benefits later for retirement.
There was a time, a long, long time ago, I'm going to date myself, back 150 years ago, when I was negotiating in a union state. And we used to talk about cost of living adjustments for
Right.
people at the top of the scale. Those terms aren't used very much anymore, but it's not unheard of to say, we're going to move people through a scale, but we're going to try to figure out a way to take care of people who are at the top with some sort of percentage. We've not done that here, and that's great input for us to have in terms of where the board is thinking. That's the kind of thing we need to hear from you today.
And those are HR challenges, not just in school systems. I mean, I have it in my day job too, where you have people at the top of the scales that, there's nowhere to move them to, so. It's not unique just to the teachers.
I have a question. These are different options, is that correct?
That is
Right.
correct.
Okay. Is there a optimal option for HR recruiting purposes? I know that's one of the challenges that we're having in the school system. So are one of these options better to meet the needs of recruiting teachers?
For purposes of live streaming, we need to move to the microphone.
Well, we have to remind each other that we have to, we have to
Right.
talk into.
Did you hear me?
I mean, for recruitment purposes, a lot of, especially young graduates, are looking at just the straight dollar value of, so having more money is easier to recruit. So we're kind of middle of the pack in terms of the salary scale, in terms of our neighbors and who we recruit against.
So which one of these three options is better for your recruiting purposes?
Ooh, there you go.
More money's better.
Okay.
The first one.
Which one of those is that? I mean, that's number one, right?
Or, no, it'd be number two, because you're increasing all of them at step one. Would go a 1% increase. The first one would not change step one, the dollar value at step one, but it'd move people on.
Correct. The first one is still moving everybody through the scale at 2.5%.
Right.
I think, almost like Mr. Kelly was saying, the second row there is almost moving the whole scale 1% over.
Right.
Almost like a cost, some people might call it a cost of living
So
increase.
while that's good for recruitment, for your existing teachers, they would not get the 2.5%
Correct.
from step one to step two.
Okay, so we're talking recruitment versus retainment.
Correct. I think for a lot of teachers, they'd still rather have more money.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody would want more money.
So on the second step up there, it says rich, rewarding experience for professionals. How much would it cost to give a 2.5% salary increase for all the staff?
$2.1 million, the end of the
So it'd be
column.
the same as the
Yeah,
first
the rich
one.
rewarding experience is the strategic goal. It's part of our strategic plan. So
Right.
that's why all three of them have that. So going over is the option. So if you give everybody 2.5%, move out on the salary increase, do you increase the whole scale 1% but don't move people on the step? Or do you eliminate compression, which basically affects the early steps and does very little or nothing actually for the later steps?
I have a
Wait a
question.
second, I got Kira here.
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing or a lot. So we could are these discrete, is it an or could we do two of the three? I mean,
Sure.
It could be our priority now.
We have presented these to you today as discrete items. It's not to say that this conversation won't come up with another idea. It's not to say by the time we present the budget, we won't have thought of another opportunity to provide the staff compensation. But today, for purposes of this conversation and priorities, they have been shared with you in a discrete manner.
thank you. And back to the step conversation, you're proposing potentially to relieve compression. That is a change on the horizontal. You're not recommending any change on the vertical, right, on the columns. Just, I'm visualizing the grid. And so the bachelor's plus 15, that's staying.
That would remain the same.
Okay.
Okay. Jim, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about this. For that bottom, the third one down, approximately how many teachers, how many staff members would be affected by making adjustments to modify or eliminate compression? Is it a large number of teachers, a small number?
I apologize, I don't have the exact number. I think
We'd have to get the number.
we'd have to get it for you.
I'm just curious about that.
If you look at
And-
our scale, there's a lot of compressed,
Sure,
or several folks
sure.
are on plateaus
Sure.
throughout the beginning, early
Sure.
parts of the scale.
And I suppose you'd have to make decisions about which or how much
a good question.
you would try to include in terms of how many, how many of the teachers, this requires this much, this requires, this person requires that, whatever it might be. But and the other thing too is, just to follow up on what the superintendent just said, we could combine two of those, couldn't we? We could do, the second and third step, which would come in a little bit less than step, than the first one, or a combination,
We could propose that.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just.
So like if you did the first two, you're looking at $3 million.
Yeah, or combine the last two,
Yeah.
which was less, or, reduce the average down to 2.0 and see how much you have left over, and just.
We've begun some discussions on creativity in this area. I think one of the things that I always try to keep mindful, and I understand we all understand the compression issue. One of the things that I think the boards over the years have been very good at is to ensure that all the employee groups get treated equally, that we didn't say, we're going to give this to you, but not to you. So the number 3 is a good fix that we need to do, but as has been pointed out, doesn't help everybody.
Right.
And that's a little bit of a turn of the boat in terms of philosophically what we've done in the past. But it's there because we have a problem, we need to fix it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And, sorry.
Sorry.
And to your point, Dr. Constantino, the second one, if I understand correctly, would be the only one that would impact bus drivers and cafeteria workers, or?
No, the first two, the top one would be a step for the scale, and which is an average 2.5%, so every other employee group would get the 2.5% as well. So it's all inclusive.
Oh, okay.
Of
So there
everyone.
are, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. There are steps for non-instructional?
No, we basically, we look at the step system for the teachers, and an average step is about 2.5%, and that's the number that we use for the other employee groups who are not on step scales when we use that model. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Okay, thank you. I did not understand that. Thank you.
I have one more question. So is the third block just for teachers? Yes.
Correct.
So based on those 3 presented items, now is your opportunity to take a few minutes to rank which priority you feel is most important. If you don't like one of the ones that we've presented, over on this side, we will have an option for you to select none, or an option for you to write in, combine 1 and 2, combine 2 and 3, whatever your best option is to proceed, to give us some direction. So Stephanie Bourgeois will present to you exactly what you need to do, and envelopes are in front of your station, and she'll share that information.
And just let me say one thing. I want to encourage the board to, and to just be honest and say, we've thought of everything we've thought of, but we perhaps haven't thought of everything you've thought of. So if there are other ideas, other priorities, things that you don't see this morning, please write them down, please tell us, please add them to the list, because we want to incorporate that. We're not asking you to pick from this, we're saying this is our best thinking on January 16th. That's going to change probably a number of times. As you know, Ms. Overcamp-Smith has experienced a death in her family, and she's in our thoughts today. So Ms. Bourgeois has graciously offered to step in. I don't know that she offered to step in, but she agreed to step in to help us through this process.
Good morning, Mr. Kelly, members of the board. Before you, you have some envelopes and with your name on it, and if you can find the one that says round 1, inside it, you're going to find 5 dots. What we want to try to do is give you an opportunity to weight your priorities. Did we seal them very? Sorry.
You don't trust us.
We were
It makes
very
for good streaming.
We didn't want to lose any of the dots. So you have the 3 choices that we have shared on the slides. And over here to the right, there is an area where you can either put your dots for none or other. If you put it under other, we ask if you have a priority that isn't other, if you can share it. There are markers up there on the top of it. But you can use your dots in any way you want. If one of those is your biggest priority and you want to put 2 or 3 dots there, you can. But we just gave you 5 dots to be able to help us identify not only what your priorities are, but where the strongest feelings are about those priorities.
Kind of cutting the dots in half.
No, sir.
And so, question, so if we are interested in combining 2, then that goes under other? Or does that just, we put both of our dots, or our dots on the 2 that we?
With 5 dots, you can do both, actually.
I would ask
but
that
yes,
you put the
it
dots
under
on what you think is important, and then note that you
Another.
think a combination is something we ought to take a look at over here.
Do I have to use a dot for a note?
Nope.
Okay, people, look. This is really a simple procedure. No, you're the board. You can do whatever you want to
Thank you, Dr. Constance.
do. You're welcome.
So you're welcome to come up and utilize your dots at any time,
Or now.
or now.
And take whatever time you want
Moment
to
for
chat,
reflection.
ask questions.
Questions?
Let's get our priorities straight.
I'm just seeing the options and thinking, oh, that's really nice for everybody else. You know my issue. I just need a new job.
Don't we all?
Yeah, sorry. Got it.
Boy, that coffee's good. Haven't had it yet, but I'm sure it's good.
Spare time. I'm not a little fast.
Yeah. Do these, can you shut it off, or do you have to hold the button? Wasn't there an option like $1 more that got a button on it?
I can't feel my dots backing off, right?
No, and you can't go into the next episode.
I can't go to the next one.
No, they're all the same color, they have a different number. There's a different number of priorities, so we have a different number.
I'm on the internet. I don't want to be on, I didn't want to sit. What camera is on?
I think we're there.
Great. Great, thank you. But are there any other questions or any other conversations about compensation? We're going to kind of move to the next area. But again, so this is very helpful. We can already draw some conclusions from the information that you've given us, and that's good. Anything else about employee compensation as it relates to this topic of steps and increases and compression? Oh, my.
You know, the only thing we are in a people business. And you know, our teachers, our support staff, our operations personnel, I mean, those are all very important parts of our organization, and obviously very important parts of our organization. And, you know, we appreciate everything they do, and we want to do everything we can for them.
I do have one.
Jim?
Yeah, and this is probably a more general question, because I was thinking about it, I was looking over last year's budget, for example. I understand the value of linking these various options with the various strategic plan priorities. What I also noticed in the budget from last year, we had some more specific priorities that were identified in that first page of the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question I have is, can we dovetail those two things? What I want to make sure is we don't lose sight of what those priorities were. I'd like to know how we've done with respect to those priorities, which ones we feel pretty good that we've met, but which ones maybe are left over and we need to pull them forward, or, it's just I thought I need a little
Right.
a
We,
better understanding of that.
In the orientation that we did for the board members, we gave you several examples of the executive summaries that we provide to the board in terms of how we met those priorities.
Right.
We also give the board a full report in June. And I think as we go through this next section, that question is going to become more clear, because
Okay.
these are a bit more specific, and you'll see these are going to start to look like some of the priorities
Gotcha. Okay.
that you see in the budget. The compensation is the big elephant in the room, and we start here and we kind of work our way to more specific things. So if this next section doesn't answer that question, or you have a thought, let us know, but then we'll do a better job of trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think in my opinion, we haven't fully addressed any priority. We have partially addressed several.
We're in various phases of
Right.
starting, haven't started, in the process, completed. Some priorities have been changed, modified, and we try to keep that up to date. All right, so we'll move into a second section regarding personnel. And this is a little bit more lengthy and a little bit more specific.
So throughout the budget development process, we've had a number of staffing requests that were made. The superintendent and his cabinet evaluated those staffing requests to put before you this morning those that we felt were the most needed within the division. The original requests that we received from our departments totaled roughly $2.3 million. The requests that we'll be presenting to you this morning are roughly $1.5 million of those 2.3. These are estimates, because we never know which new employees will take benefits, what type of benefits they will take, so we estimate on the high end just to make sure we have enough budget available to support the new employee should these positions be put in place. And I would say that the majority of the requests that I'll be sharing with you this morning are school-based positions and directly attributed to the need to target specific areas to increase student achievement as well as increase student enrollment. So the first position that we're going to discuss is a request that came from our elementary school principals to support additional FTEs to have support teachers in the areas of reading and math. And this would be at our 9 Title I schools because they already have additional support that's funded through a grant. So this is 3 positions to support the areas of reading and math, which total approximate cost of $225,000. The next request that was put forward is a staffing adjustment for an additional special ed teacher, as well as 4 educational teacher assistants. This is due to an increased number in the high-needs special ed students that we've received as a division. So the request to honor these additional 5 FTEs would cost $215,000 to the division.
Christina, just
Yeah.
the FTs and for the reading and math teachers, is that, did you say that it was for the title,
It is for the non-Title I schools.
non-Title I schools?
Oh,
Okay.
I thought you said 9 titles.
Sorry, non.
That's why I wanted to clarify that.
No.
And these staffing adjustments for special ed, are those required to meet IEPs? I mean, is this, how optional of at the end of the day, how optional an expense is this really?
Ms. Bourgeois, do you want to speak in detail?
We have seen an increase in our special ed numbers over the past year, and so there are some staffing requirements in order to meet the SOQs for caseloads. We also have, in that increase, we have also seen an increase in the number of students receiving supports in our general education setting, which necessitates some additional supports with the teacher assistants in order to make sure we're providing them with the appropriate modifications and accommodations.
So, so when you say we've seen an increase, can you quantify that for me? How many?
We had 58 more students this year than the December 1 count from a year ago. And an average caseload for a special education teacher is 20 points, which a student
Right.
can count 1 or 2 or 2.5
20.
points. So you can have anywhere from 8 to 20 students, depending on the needs of each individual student. But most caseloads are about 20. And most of our teachers, especially at the middle school and high school level, are averaging about 18 points right now. So we've got it about as close as we can.
Gotcha, thank
I'd
you.
also, Mr. Chair, I'd also say that there's a couple of things in here, and it prompted the question, is this required? There's a couple of situations here where we're coming close to be required, and so that gives us pause to make a decision. Do we budget for it now, assuming it's coming, or do we not budget for it, and then it hits us in November and we don't have the budget?
Right.
So, you're going to hear a couple of times, we're about that far away from the requirement, and
Right.
we better plan for it now. But,
Right, and in the end of the day, I mean, I have my special ed teachers that are 18 points out of a possible 20. They are not providing, I mean, I know they do a great job, and I don't want to denigrate that, but if they were working to 15 points, they could spend more time with and meet more needs than if they're working to 19 and a half points.
Correct, absolutely.
Gotcha, thank you. Julie?
How many students are touched by option, these are options again, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so option 1 versus option 2, like how many students are we talking about that would be impacted and helped by the first option versus the second option?
If I could speak to the first option, basically we have one support teacher in every elementary school right now, and they're mainly focused on reading with few focused on math. And we've had an increase in 600 students in the last 5 years, and there's a need to meet the needs of more students. Currently, they're actually focused in grades 3 through 5, and so we've got a gap in the early grades to intervene for students and bring them up to speed so they can actually be successful. Also, we've had a change in role of the math and reading specialist, when they've been going into classes and coaching teachers to bring them up to capacity so that all teachers can better serve students in math and reading intervention. And this interventionist or support teacher extra would be serving a lot of individual students in the early grades.
At the end of the day, it's hard to answer that question, because, like for instance, in the special ed side, it depends on how many points the students bring. as far as their degree of need. So, if you have 3 teachers if you have a new teacher in an elementary school, a new support teacher, I mean, how many classes would they work with to?
Probably mostly with individual students. Ms. Berta mentioned it was mainly in non-title schools. We would actually have these teachers follow the data. So we'd be looking at the data by individual school and placing student or teachers where they're most needed to serve individual students. In the last few years, we've become much more sophisticated in the analysis of data, using more data for math in particular, and we're aware of the greater needs of students that we're not serving. It's hard to quantify. We could certainly go back and look at some of the numbers where we feel students could be served at this moment in time if we had the positions.
Is there any benefit to splitting the difference so that you are helping both groups?
I think that's in your other category when you get to your choices. And we're only on page 1 of 3 slides on this whole
Right.
choice, so.
The other thing I'll mention, that the point was made about helping teachers in the classrooms. It reminded me just of an interesting conversation we had with the WJCEA, in which they have asked that we do more of that we allow reading and math specialists to come in and help general classroom teachers with strategy. That's hard to do when you have X number of people covering all the schools. So part of the rationale for this group of teachers is to begin to, and I think the teachers are right, I think there's nothing better than that kind of embedded learning. And a few extra bodies will help us deliver a little bit more. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a little bit more of reading and math skills for our general teachers in the lower grades.
So Jim, then Kira.
Have schools been identified where these positions will be assigned, or are they just sort of floating out there until we know more?
Specific schools made the requests, but
Right.
they're,
Right, you
yeah.
said it right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, and I can speak to the special education
Sure.
position. So for instance, what Dr. Constantino alluded to, we've had to do this year. We had a school that was over in their points, and we had to analyze how we could make adjustments. So after the winter break, we took a position that was full-time at one school where the numbers could be absorbed and not take them over their caseload quota. And we now have a teacher split between 2 schools. And that meets our needs, but it impacts students, it impacts teachers, it impacts the relationships they've developed in working with the other teachers in their building. So it's our decision of necessity, not of what's necessarily best for the schools.
So it's safe to assume that the assignment would be based on which schools have the greatest need?
Correct.
I think it goes back to data driving those decisions, and the principals are pretty savvy. I think, I don't recall at the moment which principals asked for it. It's been months of looking at papers and numbers, but at the end of the day, it needs to go where the greatest need is. And I think every year we get better at identifying that earlier and more keenly with the data analysis that we do.
Actually, my question was along the same lines, and picking up on Dr. Herron saying, looking at the data. So I just want to confirm that you're going to be looking at the number of kids that are significantly below grade level in reading and math skills, and deploy the resources there by the need, as opposed to, per school or,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we're done for now.
The next request presented to you is for an additional FTE to support our ever-growing population of ESL students that are requiring direct services. This is one of those situations where we are very close to the SOQ required cap, so we're being proactive instead of reactive to ensure that we have adequate resources to provide those students with the services that they need to become great students in our division. The next request is an additional FTE for a technology technician. This is due to the continued expansion of our technology infrastructure and devices within the division. So there's been a request to have an additional technology technician to support those additional devices. The final request on this slide is to add 2 FTEs for an assistant principal at Hornsby and Toano Middle School. Currently, Berkeley has 2 assistant principals with an enrollment of approximately 880 students. Hornsby has an enrollment currently of approximately 936 students, and Toano has 803 students. So we are looking at surrounding divisions to see how they align their assistant principals, and we are definitely on the low end of how we staff our APs, particularly at our middle schools when we compare those. So we are asking for this adjustment to provide some equity in our division, but also to align us more closely with what our surrounding divisions are doing.
Does the
with
SOQ
APs.
have any guidance on when you need 2 assistant principals?
This would be above and beyond what the SOQ requires. SOQ requires at 600 students, 1 AP. So for every 600, you would have 1 AP.
So then when you get, so theoretically by SOQ, it's at 1,200, you get a second AP.
Correct.
But
You
nobody
have-
wants to be a minimum SOQ, but that's,
No, nobody is.
we can be.
We do have a little trend data on the ELL. Ms. Bird had said that we were close. In 2011-12, we had 331 students requiring ELL services. In 2015-16, we have 541. So we're seeing a trend, a significant growth trend, and I think it's a matter of time before we'll be at that SOQ.
Good. Thank you.
Would you mind if I went backwards?
Yes. No, go ahead.
I don't think I understood your question of splitting. Can you say that again?
It could be my lack of...
It's taken me 5 minutes to
it-
realize that. I don't think I understood what you
it-
said.
It could be my lack of understanding. I'm assuming we get through these 2 slides, and we're also going to have our little bullets to
Yes.
be able to put our priorities. And for me, I hate to have one of them versus the other. If I could put, for example, just these 2, if I could split the difference and help both sets of populations.
I see.
Give you 1.5,
Yeah.
math and FTs and 2 special ed.
Spread it out farther.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
So the next request before you is to restore funding for our preschool. In 2013, there was a reduction of the number of seats that were available for our preschool program. So the request has been made to add 2 FTEs for general education preschool teachers. There would need to be 2 FTEs added to be teacher assistants, an additional bus driver, and additional bus assistant to support preschool runs. The total estimated cost to do that would be about $350,000. Our transportation department has evaluated the need for additional drivers and assistants based on the continued growth of our enrollment and those that are needing bus transportations to ensure we have routes that support those. So they are requesting 3 additional FTEs for drivers and 2 additional FTEs for bus assistants. The total estimated cost to support that priority would be $165,000. And lastly, there's the request for 2 additional FTEs for maintenance staff to support preventative maintenance programs of the division. One would be a roofer carpenter, and one would be an HVAC technician. That is an additional request, particularly based off of the facility condition index, where, if you remember, they said that we needed 15 additional FTEs to support their preventative maintenance plan. So we are taking a small step in making sure that we can get to where we need to get in our operational department to ensure we have adequate facilities.
The preschool, in 2013, we took that down 2 classrooms, is that what you did?
Yes.
Correct.
So how many do we have right now? 8, 10?
We have 31.
Welcome to the party, Scott.
Good morning. We at one time had 33 full-time employees for our Bright Beginnings program, and then after FY13, that went down to 31.
And so, and those serve how many students?
Right now, we have over 390 students who are being served in our Bright Beginnings program,
And so adding these 2 would increase us to
30 seats.
30 seats. and we have a waiting list of people who qualify, because this was a need-based program, right? So
Yes.
how many people do we have on our, how many students do we have on our waiting list?
I don't have that number with me,
Okay.
but I can get that to you. I do know that it's significantly more than 30.
I'm going to go out on a limb and reserve the right to be wrong, but I was in a meeting with Renee a couple of weeks ago, and I want to say that the number that she gave me was in the 60s. It's a significant number, but I will get that number.
Right. Kira?
So if memory serves, the state was working with the Virginia Preschool Initiative to try to allow divisions to recover funds that weren't used by other divisions, but I think we're not eligible to
We're not.
recover this.
That's correct.
So we've got to do a homegrown solution.
Correct.
Okay. And then I have a question, well, let's finish Mr. Thorpe, because my next question's for Mr. Snipes. so.
Okay. You're on
All
deck.
right, what?
Anybody have any questions for Marcellus?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mr. Snipes. Can you help the board understand what 3 additional bus drivers and 2 additional bus assistants will help do for the division? Just what will that, what kind of pressure will that relieve?
That will relieve some pressure with taking our McKinney-Vento students, as well as any increases in our special education. Since we don't.
I couldn't hear the very
we-
first.
My McKinney-Vento students.
Can you explain that?
McKinney-Vento is the act that requires the school divisions to transport students who have been identified as homeless.
And so each year, we don't know those requirements, but we know that is continuing to grow. And with McKinney-Vento, as you're aware, we have to take them to their school of origin, so wherever they started, so that could be anywhere across the county. And our SPED requirements are continuing to grow as well. And of course, we've increased our students' enrollment over the years as well. So though it could span 3 areas, K through 12, McKinney-Vento, or SPED.
And would this help us save any overtime costs?
Oh, yes, it definitely will help us save some overtime costs. Currently, we are doubling up on runs to take students to and fro, and we have some vacancies, and we're trying to fill those as well.
Yeah.
The preschool bus driver and preschool bus assistant in the first block, could those people also help with this overflow of, or would they just be dedicated to preschool?
Currently, we have 16 buses that are going at two different times. Those drivers are used all over. They may or may not. I cannot tell you that they can't, but it just depends on where the drivers need to be. Sometimes our preschool drivers are also our SPED drivers because they're going in at different times, so it can vary.
And then could you just let me know, what does a bus assistant do?
When we have a SPED student, we have to have someone on the bus with them. So for every SPED driver, we need a SPED aide as well to assist with students.
Holly?
I wanted to go back to something different, though, so.
Okay.
Is that okay? When we're talking about the middle schools, what are the current enrollments at Hornsby and Toano?
I think you said, go ahead, you had the numbers.
Hornsby currently has 936 students, and Toano has 803.
Okay.
Okay. Kira?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't, so are there any requests coming that, that would reflect increased enrollment, just classroom teachers, and are they in here at some point?
You'll see later on where we have accounted for, we'll go through enrollment projections, we'll go through all of that information, and we'll show you how we are needing to increase staffing to meet the enrollment projections.
Okay, thank you, because
That's-
that's,
It's a staffing issue, but we put it in section 3.
okay, thank you. At some point, I
It's
would like,
coming, yep.
like you to remind the board about how class size has changed in this division since, so at some point, whenever
Yep.
that's appropriate.
Well, I can tell you now, we have, I think twice raised class sizes by one student across the division. That's an average, because when I say that, I get an email that says, do you know? Yes. But from budgetary purposes, when you change a ratio from 21 to 22, it nets us, X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That plays out in 100 different ways in the division. That's happened, I think, twice in the recession.
Okay, I think we're ready.
So we're at the next need for you to prioritize. So Ms. Bourgeois will tell you to gather envelope 2, and then she'll tell you how many dots you have and rank priorities.
Hello. This time, because of the number of priorities, you actually have 9 dots, so you will still be able to weight your priorities. We do ask, because of the number of priorities that you have to choose from, that you identify at least 3 of them as priorities that you want to support. But we still have the none and the other, and then the 8 priorities will be over here for you to choose from.
Are there any questions about wanting to change those rules? This gets a little bit more difficult.
Not everybody move at once now.
Oh, no. Sorry.
That we've not accepted any. I'll speak soon. natural? No, you. Is that all natural? Yes. Home remedy? Some concoction you came up with? Eye of newt and foot of squirrel?
Boil, boil, toil and trouble. You know, it is throwable size.
I know it. Yeah, she's gonna whip that grape at me here in a minute.
That's clear for you.
Yeah. Okey dokey then.
Too many dots.
All right,
How's that?
great. Takes a lot of pressure off. Mr. Chair, why don't we take a little break and come back and finish up?
I agree. Take a break until quarter till, 10 minutes-ish. Thanks, we're in recess.
Everybody ready? Rebecca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unless there are any questions, we'll just continue to press forward. Uh-oh, did I do that?
You did.
You didn't even jump.
Ms. Berta?
So annually, we attempt to identify areas that our efficiency changes have attributed to savings for the division. This year, we made a modification in the payroll processing to adjust it from paying a regular monthly payroll and a supplemental payroll to just one singular payroll annually, or monthly, I'm sorry. And we have continued to implement the single contract with Xerox for copy machines, whereas prior to 2 years ago, there was multiple vendors that provided services for copying to the division. So those two areas have attributed to $40,000 or $60,000 in identified savings for the division. There is a request that's non-salary related for textbook replacements at the middle school and high school to continue and complete the science textbook replacement. That would cost an estimated $90,000. The continuation of the bus replacement plan, we do have a bus replacement plan in the division to replace 9 buses annually, which is a smoothing plan. That doesn't mean that we need 9 buses every year. It could be 14, it could be 24, it could be 2. So we've looked at the numbers for the next 15, 20 years to determine what the average bus would need to be replaced to keep our replacement cycle consistent. That number is 9. In order to replace 9 buses every year, it would cost $1 million to do that. The county and city contract requires that replacement buses be housed in our operating budget while additional buses are housed in the capital improvement plan. That's the way the contract's written, so we have to abide by that in order to get funding from our funding bodies. The next request is to continue the expansion of the personalized learning laptop pilot that's currently in place at our middle schools. We currently have all 6th graders that have a device and 7th graders at Towano. And this amount of money, $1 million, would be to expand that to all students 6th through 8th grade. So it would not be a pilot anymore, it would be institution of completing the middle school one-to-one initiative. Included in that line as well, we have our technology refresh that we do annually, and that's based on levels, so we do elementary, middle school, and high school in different years. This year was a high school refresh, which had $605,000 that's already in the budget. So to complete the middle school refresh cycle, the identified funding, additional funding that would be needed above and beyond that $605,000 is $280,000.
Ms. Berta, do you view this $1 million or the $1 million to $8 million an ongoing expense? If we approve this year, do you anticipate it being the same every year for here on out?
Well, let me say that, and Brian can speak to the life of a laptop, but the idea of the laptop initiative, the personalized learning, is to expand it into the high school. So at least for 4 more years, there would be requests to continue with the laptop purchases. And at some point, there would be a refreshment cost.
Thank you.
Well, I would expect that at some point there's going to be an expansion and a refreshment cost, because
Yes.
what's the lifetime of a laptop? 3 to 5, I think is what some people say 3, some people say 5.
Good morning. Yes, sir, we currently run on a 3-year replacement cycle that allows us to keep all the devices covered under warranty. So that provides us the benefit of not having increased repair costs by having to service out of warranty devices.
Right. So $1 million, how many laptops is that getting us? Because
That's roughly, there are some additional costs in there, including bandwidth increases, licenses, things of that
Software
nature,
stuff.
but this is roughly 3,000 devices to cover all of middle school.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Along with this, the purchase of laptops, does that result in any kind of savings for the school division with regard to textbook purchases? I mean,
There's-
can we do, can the students
I-
have online kind of?
Well, I think it's too early in the pilot yet to say that by doing this, we have saved that. However, there are certainly areas that we're looking at as we move further into this. You know, I can't say that it would save on textbook costs, because then we still have to purchase that same type of licensing for digital material. However, there are other areas such as paper costs, by not having to make duplicate copies of, you know, different material, if we can save in that area. So it's a little early to say we've saved this amount of dollars, but we are certainly looking at some of those efficiencies.
Okay, so that is part of your pilot program? I'm assuming you've got some of those metrics in place?
We're gathering some of those, yes, ma'am.
Jim?
Is leasing laptops not a viable alternative?
From what I've,
cost-wise?
from what I've seen, it really doesn't save you anything. I've actually spoken with Vice President of Leasing at HP and Dell and a few others. And basically, they just take the cost of the device and divide it by 3 or divide it by 4. You're really not saving anything by leasing.
Okay.
The final request in this category is to restore funding for the division to pay for student AP exams. During the recession, that was a line item that was cut out of the budget, and the superintendent would like to have that placed back in the budget to support our student AP exam cost.
To give you some metrics, a bit of benchmarking, the last year that the division paid for AP exams, we issued 1,822 exams. The first year we didn't pay for the exams, 2013, that dropped to 1,200. The numbers of students in the classes didn't drop, but the numbers of students taking the tests and earning the credit, the college verified credit, dropped. I will say that in the last 2 years, that has increased about 100 students. We're right now, 2015, a year out, 1,362 students. So we're still 500 exams off, but we've also seen increases in enrollment as well. So this is an area that the principals have talked about almost since the day we made this decision, and I put it on the table for thought.
A couple of things on that. We still pay for free and reduced lunch students, right? We pay for their AP exams. And what are the pass rates since the last time we took it to now look like?
A pass rate on the exam would be a student earning a 3 or higher.
Thank you. Yeah.
A student in 2012, it was 1,000 students, and in 2015, it was 984. So the ratio of students getting a 3 or higher has increased because the numbers of tests have decreased, but the numbers of students who are performing at the rate we want, at the area we want them to, has increased. That make sense? No.
I think so.
When we gave 1,800 exams, we had 1,000 kids get a 3 or better.
Right.
Last year, we gave 1,300 exams, and we had about 1,000 kids get a 3 or better. So from a percentage standpoint, the percentage of students getting a 3 or more compared to the number of tests we're given has gone up. But
Right,
it's
so-
still about 1,000 people.
Yeah, so my question would be, are we paying for students who aren't going to pass to get the 3 or higher versus, and so then the question is, how many, the increase in the enrollment in those AP classes? So when we had the 1,800 kids taking it, how many kids were eligible to take those exams? When we have 984 kids, 1,200 kids taking it, how many were eligible? You know what I'm saying? I'm just,
I guess my question is there a possibility that those students who chose not to take the AP felt like they wouldn't pass?
correct. That's where I'm going.
I don't know. We'd have to ask them.
Right.
Good
It depends on how we want to promote rigor.
When we were paying for the exams in 2011 and 12, students were required to take the AP exam when they took the course, which resulted in many students who wouldn't have taken the exam, taking it and either passing or what we call Christmas treating it. We have found that some students, seniors in particular, will take the course. They get accepted to college, and they don't necessarily need to take the exam because they have been accepted to college. So the number of students getting 3, 4, and 5 has consistently grown percentage-wise, despite the fact that not that many students are taking the exam as in the years that we paid.
Okay. So in, was 11, 12 last time we paid for it?
Yes, it was.
And how many, and we had 1,800 take it then because they were required to take it because they were taking AP classes?
Correct.
So how many would that have been last year?
How many,
Would they have been required to take it if we were paying for it? Would it be 1,800, be 1,900, would it be 2,000?
exams taken were 1,362 taken. We had 769 students enrolled in courses. We don't know exactly how many students enrolled in classes and how many classes they took and exams.
Okay.
So individual students was 769, but out of those, some of them took 2 or 3 AP exams.
Correct.
So we don't have those numbers as to exactly how many exams would have been taken.
Yeah, so that's kind of where you need to be to get to apples and apples comparison. So that if we had 1,800, if we had 1,800 and 11, 12 taking it, and 1,000 passing it, and taking the AP classes, and then we had 1,800 again last year taking it, and 1,000 pass it, you know, whereas we only had 1,362 actually take it. And so it's kind of, you know what I'm getting at?
I think so.
I'm getting at? Kira?
Ms. Hummel had something too. So if I understand, this request isn't so much about the impact, the financial impact on families, as much as it is to justify our requiring that students who are enrolling in these classes take the exam so that there is an expectation of rigor, you know, of maintained rigor throughout the year. Is that, because I've always looked at this as a financial burden on family issue, but now I'm kind of thinking about it differently, that this is the division sort of.
Well, we can speak to the, yeah, it's a financial burden. I guess philosophically, you have to decide where you are. You know, when I was a high school principal, I believed that if you were going to take an AP class, you should take the exam. I still believe that. But that is not our process anymore. I'm no longer a high school principal, so I'm not running the buildings, it's not my decision. The principals are talking about this and asking about it.
But if we did pass this, then it would come along with a requirement.
We'd go back to the way it was, yes.
Yeah, it would, okay.
Sorry.
Go.
And the way it was with the requirement is that if a student did not take the exam, they wouldn't get the weighted credit. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I think that was what was leading to a lot of the Christmas tree, which was actually skewing some of the AP results for the division, which is what I can see happening should we go back to a requirement. And there are two other, like another aspect to that is depending on what schools a kid, colleges, whatever a kid's accepted to, like William and Mary only accepts 5s, 4s or 5s. So the student is, from the student's perspective, they're sitting there going, I've got to take a 4-hour test. I don't think I'm going to get a 5 on it. And so from the student's perspective, they're like, I'm paying $85, spending 4, or even if they're not. I mean, I think that's what's going through kids' minds, parents' minds. And then also from a college perspective, depending on what the kids want to major in, from a grad school perspective, medical school, law school, whatever, those schools aren't going to want the AP credits. There's some more dimensions to this than meets the eye.
And in some cases, it has been suggested that we require any student taking the course to take the exam and get X grade, 3, 4, or 5, to get the weighted credit. Unfortunately, the structure of the grading of the AP exams, which traditionally the exams are given the first 2 weeks of May, and the grading sessions are in first couple of weeks in June, by that time school is out and we cannot hold the AP grade and the college transcript or what we're giving weights in classes accountable there. So, it really is, as you said, there are many more dimensions to this than just number of students, number of exams taken.
Is the cost per test $85?
Yes, it is.
So if you take the history and the math, that's 2 times that amount?
If you are financial need, there's a sliding scale, and also free and reduced lunch students.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're now at a point in time where we can rank those 5 items by your priorities, and Ms. Bourgeois can tell you how many dots are in your envelope. I'm not sure.
Or we can count.
7 dots.
7.
Very sticky envelopes, I might add.
Can we all just assume that we all accept the first one?
Yeah, do I have to vote for
No.
the first?
You don't have to vote, no. Unless you want us to put the 60,000 back in. He's mad at me. He was leaving the house, and he was standing there wagging his tail. And I said, no, not today. Yeah, I'll take him next time. Hold it. Don't make me smile. It's against my nature.
Alrighty then, dots are up.
Thank you. Let me ask one more, and what I would ask the board is, after today, as you have a chance to mull this over and think about things, at any time, if you have a question, or there's a priority, or there's something that you think of that you didn't hear about this morning, please let us know. Drop us an email, call. You know, if you're wondering about, hey, why wasn't there anything about this? This is not the end of a process, this is the beginning of a process. So that communication would be very helpful. This is very helpful to us because it gives us an idea of where the board is at, It gives you an idea of where you're at in terms of your opinions and priorities. And we appreciate this. And we'll take this information, kind of distill it down, and we will present the superintendent's budget to you earlier than we had anticipated on February 2nd. That gives the board about 2 full months, which I hope is better than the last plan we had. We think we can get it together, but, well, we've committed to it now, haven't we? Yes, we will get it together.
It will be together.
We may be blowing the ink dry, but we'll get it together. All right, so the last part of our meeting this morning, you're done ranking, so you don't have to get up and rip open any envelopes anymore. Ms. Berta will just take you through some of the financial information she discussed at the beginning of the meeting.
So now we get into the fun part. This is a first look at where we know things sit as of today. Keep in mind, as you see this is fluid. It will change based on decisions that happen at the General Assembly and state level, as well as further discussions with the city and the county. So as we take a look at the local composite index, as you've heard, there was some adjustments that were made this year, and this happens every 2 years. We go through a re-benchmarking cycle, and they look at local composite index and make changes. The local composite index is a formula that calculates and outlines the ability of a locality to fund public education. For the first time in many years, the city of Williamsburg's local composite index has decreased. For forever, it's been the top 0.80 local composite index. That's the highest you can ever have. The impact dollar-wise in our budget is an approximate increase of $95,000. When we look at the change in James City County, it did go up, which means that the state is saying that James City County has the ability to provide additional funding to support public education. The change in the local composite index decreases our state funding by about $1.1 million. So when we...
And that number's always fluid, right?
It is.
Because it was earlier in the week, we thought it was a different number, and now we think it's this number. And so
It is. It changes as we go throughout the process,
Yep.
and the governor and General Assembly make decisions. This is just a snapshot, a historical view of composite index. I thought it's a good chart to see where we've come from and where we are. So you can see, as I said, Williamsburg consistently was the top local composite index for many, many bienniums until this biennium. James City County has been up and gone down during the recession, is now climbing back up, which is a good thing because it means that the economy in the county is growing and good.
What goes, so can you give a brief synopsis of what goes into that?
That is a huge formula. A lot of it's driven by median income, property values, tax rates. It's a huge, huge formula that they crunch at the state level to tell us our numbers. I can provide that to you if you're interested in seeing it.
Please, God, don't. Thank you. Sure, Kira.
Would it be an oversimplification to say that the state, so in the city's case, which is near 0.8, that they think the city should pay 80% of the cost to educate the kids, whereas the county should pay 56%? Is it based on going to 100, or is that incorrect?
It's looking at state funding versus county and city. So it's saying the city would have to fund 0.80, 80%.
80%,
And
okay.
20% would come from the state.
Right, okay.
Yes, that is correct. That's the split in the share between local and state funding.
I would just like to make an editorial comment that the state, in all of its wisdom, has decided that this community can afford to pay a bigger portion of public education, despite the fact that our free and reduced lunch numbers have gone up, our special education numbers have gone up, and our limited English proficient numbers have gone up. So I just think that they must have a different worldview than we do, and it's
Clearly a different formula.
So each year, we use a tool called Future Think to look at enrollment and project what our anticipated growth is going to be for the upcoming budget cycle. So and these are September 30th enrollments. So when we look at where we were in 2006, we had 10,105 students. This year, and September 30th, we had 11,303 students. So we have grown by 1,198 students over the course of 10 years. In our Future Think projection, we do use the conservative projection from Future Think, and we are anticipated to grow by another 130 students for the upcoming year.
And when you say conservative, that is not the highest
That is not the highest.
projected or the lowest, that's the mid-range?
This is their low projection.
This is their low projection?
Yes.
So they give us a high projection and a low projection, so this is their low. So this year, we're at 11,303. What was their projection for this year?
11,316. We were very close.
That's pretty daggone good, if you
Yes.
ask me. Okay.
Future Think reports, when I have looked back at them over the last 5 years, have been within 1 percentage point of accuracy.
With the low figure?
Yes.
There's also a figure you'll see in a minute that comes out of the governor's office, which
Yes.
nobody uses,
Understands how that happens, right?
just for the record.
So as we build our estimated revenues and staffing allocations, as I said, we look at the Future Think reports, and we have options available to us. We typically look at their low enrollment and their most likely enrollment. They do also have a high enrollment, which is not typically one that you want to base your revenue projections off of. We also look at the governor's proposed budget and see where his numbers or the state numbers are coming in for enrollment. In addition to that, we look at what the WJCC core staffing allocation is. Currently, our elementary K through 2 classes have an average of 20 to 1 with a cap of no more than 23 students on average in those grade levels. At third grade, the cap is, or the average ratio is 22 to 1 with a cap of 25. Fourth and fifth grade have a ratio of 25 to 1 with a cap of 28. At our middle school level, we currently staff at 18.5 to 1, and high school 20 to 1. And that's just an average. That doesn't mean a classroom may actually reflect those numbers.
And there are no caps in the upper.
Correct. SOQ caps, but I think it's like 34, 35 to 1, so.
So when we talk about caps in the elementary school at 23, so if I've got, can we talk a little bit about how that works? So if I have 5 classrooms that are 23, when the one kid comes in and makes it 24, we don't go get a teacher,
Well,
or do we?
therein lies the rub. Every September and October, and what's happened during the recession is that we're pushing the caps more than we ever have.
Right.
So it really becomes a situation of triage where if school A has 5 sections of 23 and one of them becomes 24, and school B has 5 sections and all of a sudden they're at 25 or 26, and we have this amount of resource, we're going to put it over here. We might live with the over cap to see what happens, because we know that in the first 60 days of the school year, 90 days of the school year, things shift and move around. We also have in the past, absolute last resort, and I think we've done this once since I've been here, is having to shuffle teachers from building to building after the opening of school because of enrollments. So we're doing everything possible to stay within the caps, but I can't sit here and say to you that if one classroom at one grade level goes over by one student, there really is not much we can do about it until the problem becomes more acute.
Right, I mean, and as we live closer to our cap, that issue becomes more prevalent and more.
It has, along with the class size issues, it just creeps up. Every
Right.
year it gets more and more difficult. You know, 28 in 5th grade used to be an anomaly, it's not an anomaly anymore.
Right. So because kids don't come in discrete units of 20, it makes it very.
Right. If we could bundle them in groups of 25, this would be a lot easier.
Yeah.
But they don't come that way, and they don't go, and they move, and they're transient, so.
Right, okay.
And-
Kira?
And when, before the recession, if memory serves, we also had a pool of teachers ready to be deployed into schools if early. And now, if you do decide we've got to pull the trigger and hire someone, it's very
Right.
disruptive because,
When I first arrived here, and my experiences in my previous position, my job in Georgia, for example, was to staff 14,000 people. And Mr. Baker and I used to work with a very large contingency pool of teachers so that when school opened, you know, we could put resources where we needed them. We had that here. But at some point, either it was right as I arrived here or right after I arrived here, we were no longer allowed to budget contingency positions. We were told that if we needed them, we'd have to go back and ask for them. That was a big change in how our ability to do business in the first 90 days of the school year, which can be traumatic when you're trying to figure all this out.
Yeah, and if we had that situation in 35 days into the school year, so you're halfway through October going into November, and now you're trying to rejuggle an entire
Right.
class and disruption to parents and teachers and
Right,
Students.
and parents, when you call parents and say, hey, starting Monday, your child's going to be in another classroom, that's not welcome news. I'll tell you, the other phenomenon that it pushes us toward is that it requires us now to hold back some required staffing and not hire them until we have head counts. The longer we wait to hire teachers, the likelihood of the quality of that teacher is in jeopardy. So it's a difficult issue.
thank you.
So as we look at the different projected enrollments based on those different items that we evaluate, the governor's proposed budget includes an estimated 11,466 kids. The low enrollment is 11,433 students, and the most likely Future Think report is 11,534. So we typically choose that low projection from Future Think to conservatively estimate our revenues to ensure that we have a balanced budget, that we don't exceed appropriation. So as you can see, the low projection would require an additional 5 teachers to support that enrollment growth. So we would build that into our budget because we want to keep those caps in mind and those grade level allocations, student-teacher ratios. So going forward, when we look at what the governor's proposed budget does show, please keep in mind that state sales tax for us isn't counted as state funding, it is counted as local funding for Williamsburg and James City County. So that's a little bit different, even though it shows on our state funding formula, the city and county do count that as local revenue. So
But it's non-optional local revenue. I mean, that money is designated by the General Assembly that say sales tax is supposed to come to
Correct.
us, so.
Correct.
And-
So
And we segregate that out in our budget,
We do.
correct? Okay.
We do. So state sales tax is projected to increase by $775,000, or approximately 6.7%. The state revenue based on SOQs is expected to decrease by $488,630, or a decrease of 2.2%, and the majority of that is attributed to the change in local composite index. Categorical and incentive funding is expected to increase. The governor has proposed in his budget the allocation of additional monies to support instructional positions. The funding is based off of 1 teacher per elementary. I have learned that you do not have to allocate that to elementary schools. That's just how they determine how much funding they're going to give you. So we would get funding for 9 teaching positions, but it's based on your SOQs. So you don't get the whole entire support and revenue from the state. They give you their portion, and you would be obligated to fund your portion as a locality in order to accept that money. And we would have to certify we hired those teachers.
All right, so if I don't fund my portion, I don't get their portion.
Correct. It's a local match requirement.
And that's 9?
9. So to overall, state revenues is expected to decrease by $375,000, or 1.8%. Netting that together with our sales tax, when we start looking at revenues, we're positive by $400,654 as we start, or just about 1%, it's 0.9%. So then we start evaluating the non-negotiable increases and the things that we know we are going to have to make decisions on as a division. So health insurance is always a bear and a topic of discussion. Health insurance is not a non-negotiable. You could pass on whatever increase that exists to an employee. That traditionally has not happened in Williamsburg, James City County. Typically, we pick up the increase as the employer instead of passing that on to the employee. This estimated 8% is based on discussions that we've had with our insurance provider. It does not incorporate any of the changes that could be recommended from the health insurance task force that was put in place by the superintendent and the school board in the fall. So the task force has done some work, and we will have some recommendations as part of the superintendent's proposed budget that may affect this 8%, but I wanted you to know if we make no changes, this is what we think it's going to cost right now based on our discussions with the health insurance provider. It is very early. Typically, we do not have the finalized increases from them until late February, early March. So that gets incorporated into your budget when we bring that forward to you, that we would need to adopt by April 1st.
Now, when you say health insurance increases, that we haven't passed that along to our employees.
Yeah.
We haven't passed the split number.
Right.
So if the premium is $1,000 and we're paying 80% of it and the employee's paying 20% of it, I don't know how close those are. If it goes up to $1,500, we still pay 80% of it, they still
Correct.
pay 20% of it. So teachers out there who say that, when they say my health insurance costs have gone up, that's the split we're talking about, that we haven't moved that number to 75 or 50%. We're still keeping our 80%.
Correct.
And the changes we experienced last year in healthcare, because I know there's been a lot of emailing I've heard from teachers, were programmatic changes, were changes in deductibles, changes in plans, and trying to keep costs down and lower costs. And so if you stayed in a particular plan, the cost went up, it looked to the employee like we were giving them less. We were still paying that percentage.
Right.
It's just the plan changed.
Yeah, the money we paid went up as well as the money they paid went up.
Correct.
And
Correct.
the challenge is health insurance is a very obviously emotional topic. So the challenge you get is that their 8% increase, and as opposed to our salary adjustments, 1% of their entire versus 8%, that's where they start getting take-home pay issues.
We say every year that we live in a time now where you have to pay attention to health insurance. You have to read for years, we used to just pick a plan. It's becoming more and more complicated, and Tim is working to the degree possible to help our employees understand the options that are available to them. But where we heard negative comments from employees were employees who stayed with a program, expected a raise, and that raise, most of it got eaten up by the increase in the health insurance. And, I would get an email from a teacher that said, I thought I was supposed to get a raise. And mass communication of this is a challenge.
Right. Take-home, you did get a raise, the take-home pay was less because of your health
Correct.
insurance costed. Right.
So then we begin to talk about the non-negotiable increases. It is a re-benchmarking year, so the VRS employer rate is going to change from 14.06% to 14.66%. The impact on our budget is an additional $1.1 million.
Could you,
VRS is retirement, employee retirement. Employees have to pay 5% out of their pay to the retirement system. We have to pay the percentage that's defined by the VRS board. That percentage has steadily climbed over the last several years. Based on actuarial studies, they are trying to get it so that we are funding 100% of the actuarial report between the state portion and the employer portion. This number will continue to climb for the next 4 or so years. One caveat that I will tell you that's unusual, in previous bienniums, when they raised the rate to 14.66, that's consistent in year 2 of the biennium. This year, the expected increase for fiscal year 18, as we plan for that budget next year, is expected to climb to 16.32%. So we have a change year after year, which is unusual. Usually they change it one year and let you sit idle for a year and then change it again.
But not only are they changing it, they're going up almost
Drastically.
2%.
Yes. So
Well,
it's triple.
it'll be, the number next year will be triple this one. And it's rare. I don't recall VRS climbing twice in one biennium. So as we prepare to chat with legislators, this is something that I would encourage the board to study and understand the impact on the school division.
Did I answer your question, Ms. Hummel?
I don't think so.
No, that's why I asked.
That's okay. I'll talk to you later
Sure.
about it to seek clarification.
Sure. So then we have other areas of non-negotiable increases. Our agreement with New Horizon, we do have some SPED compliance issues that we need to address at the preschool level, so we can provide a preschool teacher and an assistant to meet the needs of those special ed preschool students. VDOE has changed the state code that requires us to support one preschool teacher locally. So we've incorporated that into this number. And as you know, we're implementing a finance HR system, so we will have this 1 year of dual system until we completely get operational on the new financial HR payroll system. in January of 2017. So those non-negotiable costs total in approximately $653,000.
So the things that we just voted on relative to preschool and sped are not this?
They are not.
Okay, thank you.
So when we look at the total of health insurance estimated increases and what we know about VRS and our non-negotiable increases, we have a $2.9 million gap. When you add the governor's proposed budget revenues, an additional $400,000, then we're at $2.5 million before we start even looking at any of the priorities that we would like to present as a division and as a school board. So I'll take it one further step. So looking to add those 5 teachers that we need because of the increased enrollment, our bottom line, before we even start adding anything, is $2.9 million. So we're $2.9 million in the hole based on the governor's proposed budget, not asking for any additional local revenues at this point. This is strictly looking at state revenues compared to what we know we have to increase on the expenditure side.
For those of you who will be attending the legislative meetings in February, one of the presentations is going to be made by a gentleman named Jim Regenbald. I would encourage you, Jim Regenbald is an analyst, financial analyst. He is an independent analyst, and he does an excellent job of, I've heard him 3 times already this year, and I'm starting to sink in, where the state economy is growing. It's not the dire situation we were in 3 or 4 years ago. And there are monies there that are not being earmarked for anything at the moment. So I would encourage the board that if you are going to attend that meeting and if you see Mr. Regenbald on the agenda, I would encourage you to go to that session, because I think that he does an excellent job in taking a very complicated situation and explaining it to those of us who need to understand it in terms of trend data, trend analysis, revenue at the state level. And he explains things like the state's rainy day fund, what the state has done in terms of part of the VRS problem has been traditionally the state borrowing from VRS and now having to pay it back because of the actuarials. And so you can quickly get down a rabbit hole of problems. He's probably the best guy I've heard to explain it to me so I understand it. And so just a word of encouragement if you get a chance to hear him.
That concludes the information we prepared for you this morning. I just want to reiterate the fact that please know that these numbers are fluid. Until we see what the General Assembly does, we don't know the final impact. But based on the first look, we are starting the gate out in the hole. So it's a challenging year.
So based upon where we are, the General Assembly has just started on Wednesday, and so they're going to start really getting into it here in the next few days. So in order to have the same school system I have today, I'm asking for roughly $3 million from the county and the city additional just to be where I am today.
Correct.
And being the most senior person here, which is just scary to me, and having lived through budgets from 2010, this continues the trend that the problem with public education funding is not with the county and the city. It's squarely at the General Assembly and in Richmond, and I've said that, been clear about that for years. The county and the city do everything they can to make up that gap that comes out of Richmond, but the gap continues to grow coming out of Richmond. And I appreciate the work of our city council and the supervisors, the county supervisors, in meeting the need for our public education. I guess unfairly so, the state kind of throws this burden squarely on their back, and I think it's inappropriate.
And the state, again, Mr. Regenbald will explain to you just how they do that, how the state is putting more pressure on localities to make up differences. And you only squeeze it so much.
So have we helped you here today?
Oh, absolutely. You want everything.
Of course we do.
Actually, it's very helpful. I think for us, the conversation and listening to the questions that you ask are very helpful. I would encourage you to continue the dialogue, to ask questions, to drop emails, to say, hey, what about this, what about that? If we haven't been clear, please let us know where we have not been clear. The process from here is ours now. Now we have to build a budget where revenue and expenditures are balanced. That's the law. Unlike some other governmental agencies which don't have to do that, we have to do that. And we'll come back to you on the 2nd of February with that presentation. That night is usually just the presentation, and when you get the budget, you certainly can have a discussion, but it's probably the most overwhelming evening, and then we kind of level off from there. But we are trying to give you more time, and more time for the community as well to understand the budget.
Well, and I would say that the process from here on is not yours alone. Your process is to develop your budget and the proposed budget that you come in February. I think it's incumbent upon board members, supervisors, and city councilmen, as well as, and most importantly, the public, to express their concerns to their legislators in Richmond about where we are with public education in the city, in the county, and really, frankly, across the state. That we've got to kind of make an impression there that we are being painted into a corner that really does not bode well, I believe, for the long term of the state. So
There are some sobering statistics, and we just heard Jim the other day again at another meeting in Richmond, and when, I don't remember, I'm not going to give you the exact numbers because I don't remember them, but when you see where the state ranks nationally in wealth, and you see where the state ranks nationally in support for public education, it's a pretty sobering gap.
Right. So a lot of work to do. Anybody have anything else before we go?
For anyone listening in, could you kind of give anyone streaming in today kind of an overview of the Crescent letter that was sent out?
Yes. The urban crescent is every locality. If you can imagine the Commonwealth of Virginia, and you were to draw a crescent from Northern Virginia down 95 through Hampton Roads, every one of those communities is part of what is referred to as the urban crescent. There was a meeting called in Fredericksburg in December because every one of those localities has the very same concern we do, and that is they can't make it work either. Fairfax County can't make it work, we can't make it work. And so the idea, and the urban crescent had come together before me, and I think some board members knew about that. I didn't know about that. And to send a message to Richmond that said, look, it's not just one or two school districts, it's cities, counties, towns, schools. So this meeting was not just school superintendents, but mayors, city councilmen, some legislators, superintendents, Chamber of Commerce representatives, because the Chamber of Commerce has as much at stake in these issues. And everyone the group worked on a communication to the governor that said, here's 70 or 80 localities that are real concerned about this, and we were asked to sign it. We signed it. The chamber signed it. The city signed it. County signed it. And that letter will be sent to the governor as evidence that there is a significant portion. I think the number was this urban crescent represents 70% of the population in the Commonwealth. So they're going to get a letter from 70% of the population that says this isn't working out real well. Hopefully that will have some impact, or at least inspire conversation.
Yeah, there's a lot of Virginia that's outside the urban crescent, but not a lot of people. Yes, Kira?
I would just like to thank the administration for the process, because it's so closely tied to the strategic plan. And we have 5 strategic priorities. The vast majority of what we did today was really focused around 3 of them. And so I know budget constraints don't allow us to to think about all of them, and that's, I mean, we think about all of them, but budget for all of them, and I find that, sometimes frustrating, but I do appreciate turning a strategic plan into strategic management and strategic budgeting, and I appreciate the connection back to that, because it keeps us focused on what's important, which is providing a premier education in this community. So thank you.
Anybody else have anything? I would just like to thank the administration for the good work in putting this together and giving up a portion of your Saturday to help educate those of us on the board of where our issues are and where we need to put our thoughts and our resources. Thank the board members for their attention and engagement and their great questions. I think it bodes well that we're really putting a lot of thought into this. While I have the public's and everybody's attention, there are 6 of us up here. We are advertising for a representative for the Powhatan seat. It's an advertisement in the Gazette today, I guess. So we'll continue to accept letters of interest for that position until the 27th of January. And then there'll be a public hearing on our meeting on the 2nd of February. I think most of us are going to have breakfast together on Monday in the AXO breakfast. And then we have a board meeting on Tuesday at County F. So anything else we need?
Just a thank you to the board for your assistance in the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Constantino. Thank the board members. Enjoy the rest of your somewhat long weekend, and we are adjourned.
Good job.
Thanks, Jim.